Hello and welcome to our live with Jonah Paquette. My name is Carson Morris. I'm with PsyD Publishing. And Jonah, welcome. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you as always. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Jonah and I have worked together a long time here at PsyD and PsyD Publishing. Jonah's been a long-time friend of PsyD, done a ton of speaking for us, a ton of writing, and also does work with Psychotherapy Networker magazine. So we've got some long history, and we're so excited to have him publish his next book with us called Happily Even After. So, Jonah, you've done the workbook, you've done other things, you've written a book on awe. What made you want to come back and write Happily Even After?
Yeah, I think a few factors. One is probably the very obvious, most timely one, which is just kind of what the world has been through over these last few years with so much trauma, pain, loss. I think it was easy to look at that from the outside and think, well, maybe we should just put a pause on this whole happiness business and positive psychology business until things settle back down. But what was really interesting as I started to look more into it and dive more into that research was that there was such a wealth out there of ways that we can apply these very same skills and concepts for well-being that we tend to think about um, to help us through challenging times, whether that's pandemic related, whether that's loss that we've been through, whether that's any sort of painful life experience. Many times those same principles, whether it's gratitude, compassion, self-compassion, awe, mindfulness, you name it, have just as much importance, if not more, to help us through the hard times as when the seas are calm, so to speak. So that really sparked my interest and passion in putting this work together, was how to help people find greater well-being, find greater fulfillment, find greater happiness, even or especially after life knocks them down. And so the book will have some familiar concepts, some new ones, I think, as well for a lot of readers, and hopefully can help a lot of people in the months to come after it releases.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's super timely. And as we talked about when you're proposing this book, it isn't just about the pandemic or coming out of this kind of weird time that we've been in, but really harnessing those tools so when life is good and when life is bad, you can have a practice to go back to, something to make you feel better immediately, and using that positive psychology in a way that doesn't feel fake or
Yes.
inauthentic. And that can kind of lead us into our first question of positive psychology. There's a lot out there
Mhm.
about it, and what do you say to those people who might want to label it or call it toxic positivity?
Well, I would disagree, but the longer answer to that is, I think toxic positivity is a real thing, and you certainly run some risk talking about topics like this, talking about well-being and happiness and fulfillment, um, when people are going through something. And everybody goes through something, to your point. So whether it's, even if you manage to emerge from the pandemic somewhat unscathed, right? There's going to be something else, and if it didn't happen now, we're going to go through something in a few years. If you live long enough, which is, a few days or more, you're going to have something happen to you, right? So I did want to make it broader than that. But, I think if we speak in terms of language like, well, turn that frown upside down, or look on the bright side, or happiness is a choice, I think there's a lot of sort of that good vibes only approach to life, which is to me very unhelpful and very shallow and very
Mhm.
invalidating, I think, for people. We're going to run into a lot of trouble. Now, I think what I try to do in my writing and my speaking is to really, first and foremost, even back up a step and say, well, what do we even mean by this clunky word happiness? Because I think even though it's in the title of some of my books, you need to unpack that a little bit. And we're not just talking about feeling good. We're not just talking about every day of life being easier than the last and good vibes only, and or any of those more toxic positivity type states. We're really talking about this combination of three separate but connected ingredients when we're talking about true happiness, or real happiness, as it were. Positive emotions, right? Sustain positive emotions as I think about the present, the past, the future. So gratitude, hope, optimism, that's important to cultivate, but that's really just a small part of it. We also want to think about, how can I build a life that's satisfying, that's enriching? Researchers call this evaluative happiness, but it's really just about fostering a sense of life satisfaction. And then that deepest level of having a sense of meaning, purpose, belonging to something greater than ourselves. So this would be called eudaimonic happiness, but it's really just about having that deeper connection to something that's bigger than just ourselves. So really thinking about well-being or happiness as being this combination of hedonic happiness, feeling good, evaluative happiness, feeling satisfied with life, and eudaimonic happiness, which is about feeling a sense of connection, meaning, and belonging to
Mhm.
something bigger. And that's a much deeper, more sustainable, more enriching, and more complex, in many cases, state than just trying to feel good all the time. And in fact, we want to make room for all the emotions, right? We want to make room for pain. We want to make room for loss. We want to make room for sorrow. Struggles of life is inevitable, and we're not trying to minimize that. But I think part of the problem is that for many of us, we get stuck there
Mhm.
for various reasons. One of them is just even our brain's negativity bias, right? Uh, we get stuck in these negative patterns of emotion, of thought, of cognition, and we have to develop skills that are distinct oftentimes from just the skills that we need to overcome painful emotions, but to actually grow, foster, and develop positive states of mind, positive habits, and positive principles that we can apply in our life moving forward.
Yeah. So you talk about people who might be in a funk. Maybe it's not, clinically diagnosed, but what's your go-to recommendation for someone who's just in a funk?
Mhm. Yeah, it's well. First, I think we all get in funks, and I think it's important to make room for, like I said, and to validate and to sort of see if there's something that needs. Sometimes when we're in a funk, it's a sign, it's a signal, it's like a thermometer that there's something in our life that needs to be addressed.
Yep.
But moreover than that, I think when it comes to the skills and the principles that I write about and speak about primarily, I think it's important to remember that you know well-being or happiness in this way is not something that just happens. It's something that we cultivate. It's something that we develop. Sometimes when we're in funks, it's because we've gotten away from some of the practices that nourish us, that enrich us. So I think we've all been there to different degrees, but I think it's all the more important when we feel in that state to not just check our watch and hope that we'll wake up feeling better tomorrow or the next day, but that we actually go out of our way consciously, deliberately, with intentionality around it to develop skills and practices, like the ones that we're talking about here, whether that's compassion-based approaches, mindful awareness, gratitude, noticing moments of wonder. And this is all the more important, I think, when life throws us challenges. And that really was one of the main aims that I had in writing Happily Even After is if there's one money back guarantee that I can tell people, even as a happiness writer, speaker, it's that life is going to knock us down. Life is going to throw us challenges. And how we respond to that is really of the utmost importance. Do we stay down or do we start to push back with the cultivation and the development of these different positive states of mind and principles?
Yeah, and I really like that. I was thinking about myself or friends who, if they miss a workout class or yoga or something for a few days in a row and I do it myself too. I'm like, man, like why am I in such a funk? Like why what what's been the difference the past week? And sometimes it is missing out on those practices that make you feel good, whether it's one of the wonderful practices in your book or
Mhm.
just being aware of the things that put you into a good state of mind. So if that's fitness or taking a walk, or having that phone call with your friend, it's important to be, I think, just aware of those things that do bring you joy and do kind of level out your day, and so you can be more uplifted.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think just being aware too of what is it that makes you feel better is so important.
And it's going to look different for everyone out
Right.
there. And for me, I mean, you mentioned taking a walk. I know for me, if I go too long without being in nature, right,
Yep.
and the benefits that gives me to my mood, to my sense of stress, there's all kinds of interesting research, some of which I even highlight in Happily Even
Yep.
After about the psychological health benefits. But for somebody else, it might be when I feel disconnected from people that I love. For others, it
Mhm.
might be when I'm fixating on the stress of life without noticing the joys of life. For others, it might be when we get into that sort of that cycle of self-criticism and how to overcome that. So it's going to look a little
Yeah.
different for everybody, but so important, I think, to be checking in with ourselves, to be in our own corner, so to speak, when it comes to this. And oftentimes reconnecting to those parts of life that give us joy, meaning, purpose, belonging, and so on is really the first most important step we can take there.
Yeah, definitely. So, as we call out in the description of your book, there's so many books out there about happiness or just about self improvement. Why is happiness so hard to achieve, and why are people struggling with this?
Yeah, well, I think that it's easy to look at what's happening kind of in the world right now, and highlight and point the finger there. But the reality is that even going back decades, even as a lot of external sort of things that we might expect would make us happier, greater material wealth, greater standards of living, reductions in things like infant mortality, better education outcomes, things like that. You've actually seen several studies looking at rates of overall well-being levels spanning different groups, and demographic groups going in the wrong direction. So clearly we're doing something wrong when it comes to happiness. And I do, in one of the early chapters of Happily Even After, highlight, even putting aside what's happening now, what are some of the reasons why things that we think will make us happy often don't, or why do we sometimes feel like, hey, my life, I should feel better than I do right now, and yet we still struggle. And putting aside situations where we're talking about a more clinical diagnosis, for example, there's just a number of other factors that we all struggle with from time to time that I think also help account for this. One I mentioned earlier is that our brain's negativity bias, right? Really good
Mhm.
for survival, really lousy when it comes to feeling happy and content and fulfilled. So we fixate on negative situations, difficult stressors, much more than we focus on the good. 10 good things can happen to you in a day, but it's that one stressful, lousy one that we can't stop thinking about at night. So that's certainly a big piece. I also write about phenomenons like our expectations around happiness. A lot of us go through life thinking, well, if I achieve this, or if I move there, or if I meet the right person, or if, then I'll be happy. And it turns out a lot of those external factors that we tend to focus a lot on, when they do impact our happiness, it doesn't impact it as much as we think. And even when it does help, it doesn't help for as long as we think. And we tend to adapt to those circumstances, this process known as hedonic adaptation. So I think that's another factor. I highlight genetics. That's something that just can be luck of the draw, depending on how you're looking at it. And I think
Mhm.
an important one, which speaks to what you mentioned about all these books, all these websites, there's a recognition that, okay, on the one hand, happiness is a good thing. We've talked about it for thousands of years. Philosophers, religious thinkers, what does the good life mean? So many books out there, websites, but it's led to this, I would say, like relentless pursuit of happiness. And I
Yeah.
write about this in the book too, where there's some interesting research showing that yes, happiness is a good thing, but if all we do is obsess over becoming happier and try to build our life to become happier, we actually ends up making us less happy in the long
Yeah.
run. So what we want to do is a subtle distinction, but it's actually more about focusing on the process of becoming happier as opposed to the outcome. It's saying, can I develop the skills and the principles for well-being, and then the well-being and happiness levels will take care of themselves down the road, as opposed to obsessing over, well, how am I feeling moment to moment? Am I
Mhm.
feeling joyful? I should be feeling better than I am. But if we instead focus on those building blocks for well-being, it tends to lead to much better outcomes. So I certainly highlight that quite a bit as well.
Yeah, for sure. I've been paging through the book and, picking out pieces that I like and practices that I like. Um, are there any new or exciting practices in your book that people haven't heard before?
Yeah. So I think, by and large, there's going to be a handful of broader principles, some of which are going to be familiar to readers. As I mentioned, things like mindfulness, gratitude, self compassion, but with a particular focus on how do we apply these during times of challenge, which I think is a little bit different. And then there's going to be
Mhm.
some different principles that I think may be less familiar to readers. Certainly, principles like awe. A lot of readers won't quite realize how beneficial that is. I write a chapter on this phenomenon known as psychological richness, which is essentially like doing things that help us to feel alive, doing things that push our limits, our challenges. Some of the focus on strengths. I even have a chapter where I talk about different happiness perspectives from all around the world, and what we can learn from those. So I think there's, on the broader principle side of things, there's going to be some familiar, but some new ones. Where I've really tried to focus in on, though, is how do we take even some of those, old familiar ones, and think about how can I incorporate this and apply these during times of challenge, during times of stress, during times of pain. And so that's, I think, where maybe some of the most exciting stuff for readers is going to come in when it comes to that. So, I think a couple of them that really, jump out to me. I have a lot of focus on how do we, find growth following painful experiences. So there's a chapter that really focuses on resiliency
Mhm.
and identifying specifically how do painful experiences not just lead to loss, but actually lead to gain, as strange as that might sound.
Yep.
So looking at ways that setbacks leave us feeling more appreciative, to have a greater sense of connection with the people that matter in our lives, to live a life that's more aligned with our values. So I think that's a sort of a different perspective than we're used to. I have a chapter on developing a sense of meaning, and I encourage readers there to really think about, you know, embracing the sense of impermanence, to think about things like, if I were to have 1 year to live, and we've had so many reminders of that, how can I identify the life that I want to live in that time? What really matters? Who do I want to be? And I focus quite a bit on that. Even when it comes to skills like and practices like awe, right? Which we think about as being this, like, oh, I have to go to the Grand Canyon, or I have to, visit the Eiffel Tower. That in reality, all is all around us. And if we can open up our eyes to these wonders that we forget are actually wondrous, that can be such an antidote for the stress and pain that we sometimes
Yeah.
feel. So, like, literally, wherever you are, if you're watching this, you can look around your room or wherever you happen to be joining from and just notice how many things in your field of vision would be absolutely mind blowing to somebody 10 years ago, even, let alone 100 years ago or
Mhm.
1,000 years ago. And we forget sometimes that we are surrounded by these magical parts of life. But when we turn the mundane into miraculous, it can go a really long way too, in terms of opening our eyes and seeing things from a new perspective. So, all kinds of, I think, exciting ways that we can apply
Yeah.
these skills that we think about as just like up here, for people that are doing well, we can actually apply them just as effectively when we're struggling.
I think for the therapist watching, you give a great story about how when you were in graduate school doing the three good things practice,
Yeah.
and how you weren't paying attention to the details and you kind of skipped an important piece of it, which as you were working on it with your client, they weren't benefiting. And it was just kind
Yeah.
of, well, day one, I'm grateful for my wife and my dog. Day two, I'm so grateful for my wife and my dog. And then day three, I'm not grateful for my wife today because we got into a fight. And
Yeah.
so you missed that detail. Do you want to share a little bit about,
Sure. You
how
know,
these therapists can make sure they're following the true spirit of these practices?
Yeah, and sometimes the devil's in the details, as you say. I always forget that because, I think therapists who are watching all know that oftentimes your clients, your patients, are your best teachers when it comes to this. So I certainly learned a lot from that experience, where, um, just having my client come back a week later with the same identified areas of gratitude. You don't have to know much about gratitude to know that that's not going to make any difference if every day you're either grateful for your wife, your dog, your kid, and that's it. So probably my favorite simple practice that a lot of people are familiar with, but if you think about how powerful it would be to actually do this for a client or even for you, is just taking that one step further, where instead of these broad sources of gratitude, what we can do is focus on three things literally from today that you're grateful for. So from the time you woke up to this moment right now, wherever you're watching from, what are three things that have gone well? What are three things from this moment, from this day, that have gone well? Secondly, to think about why those happened. Who contributed to them? Was it something that you did, like noticing it, right? Something that you would have normally glossed over, a beautiful sunrise and so forth? Or was it through the contribution of someone else? Sometimes when we focus on who contributes to these good things, it not only increases our sense of gratitude, but increases our sense of gratitude to those people in our lives. So that's the second little twist. So it's from today, it's what helped make this happen. And the third, which makes it really hard, honestly, even though it's a very simple sounding practice, is to never repeat an item
That's
as
right.
long as we're doing it. So if you're doing it for 30 days, imagine what that would be like, not on day 1, 2, or 5 even, but on day 10, 15, or 30, when you're up to good thing number 30, 45, 90, never repeating an item on your list. All of a sudden, we have to seek out the good things in life. We start to look at our lives from a completely different vantage point than what we tend to do, which is to fixate and focus on the negative. We're going to do that anyway, right?
Yeah.
But we have to counter that negativity bias with intention and with effort. And to me, that's one of the best ways that we can do that.
Yeah. Well, Jonah, this has been so fun talking with you, and we're so excited for this book to come out. It comes out December 6th. You can find it now for pre-order on Amazon, on PsyD.com, and wherever books are sold. So Jonah, congratulations. We'll be talking again soon and letting people know more about this wonderful book. But yeah, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and Jonah or Pessy can get back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great to see
Thank
you as
you.
always.